but for everybody who's here, let's kick off. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all to the final BASIS webinar of 2024. Slightly different time. We normally do it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday, but we're delighted to be joined today by Lord Deben. I'm coming to you live from EFL House today. So Ben Fisher's with me. I think you all know Ben, who works on the EFL's sustainability work and really drives that forward. And we've just been talking about EFL's membership of BASIS and how we can take that further. But it's appropriate, I think, that I'm at EFL House today because when Lord Deben and I first started talking about this session, it was very much in the context of football, partly because the Football Regulator Bill is currently going through the House of Lords, and we're going to touch on that as part of this discussion. But the intention for this discussion is that it goes way beyond football, and it's got much wider application across the whole BASIS membership. I think a lot of you already know Lord Deben. For those of you who don't or who need a kind of reintroduction, we were talking just before everybody joined. Lord Deben, you've been in Parliament for 51 years now, in one house or another. So your parliamentary career encompasses both the UK's entry into and departure from the European Union, just to put it into context in terms of your political longevity. And you've held, senior positions, cabinet roles, and for the last 25 years or so have chaired built and run an extremely successful sustainability consultancy business, Sancroft International. And we're going to touch on all of this, but I think the place that I'd like to start is with your tenure as chair of the Climate Change Committee. Now, you can describe what the committee is and does better than I can, but just to try and summarise it, the committee was created by the Climate Change Act in 2008, and that act at the time committed the UK to reduce its carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. And I think the way that I would try and characterise it, and you can tell me that I will definitely have characterised it in the wrong way, would be that politicians make promises and they make laws, but when a promise relates to a milestone that's 42 years away, it's very difficult to hold them to it. So the committee under your leadership took that promise of 80% by 2050 and leveraged its statutory footing to say, this is how you do it. So year on year, this is how you need to reduce the UK's emissions to put you on a pathway to meet that objective. And here is the action plan to enable you across various different areas of policy and industry. Here is the action plan and the roadmap to enable you to actually hit those targets. And then you took it a step further during your tenure as chair, which was to say your promise of 80% is not sufficient to keep pace with the science, with what it's telling us about climate change. So you need to up it to 100%, which is what happened in the latter days of Theresa May's premiership. And by making that promise 100%, you, through the committee, provided roadmaps and action plans which encompass the whole of society, which is why this is relevant to sport, because that law just isn't just about the UK public sector. It's about every person and every organisation in the whole of the country working together to meet net zero. Is that a reasonable kind of characterisation? And can you just tell us a little bit about the committee?
I think it's a remarkable one. You've summed it up very, very clearly indeed. I mean, the whole purpose of it is that if you leave it to the politicians, what they'll do is to agree that they've got to do it. But then every year there'll be a good reason why you can't do it this year, because there'll be a by-election or a general election, or there'll be some reason or other. So what we have to do and had to do in this Climate Change Committee was to make sure there was a programme to reach it, so that we have these budgets. We've done 6 carbon budgets, and my successor will have to produce the 7th carbon budget, which gives the roadmap so that the government, exactly what it has to do, what civil society has to do. And then the Climate Change Committee has a duty to judge it every year and say, this is what you haven't done, this is what you should do, here's the way you can get round that. And then Parliament decides how it can meet what, by then, of course, is a legally binding demand. And the truth is that as we get towards, and after all, we're 50 is not all that way away. As we get towards that, it becomes ever more important that everybody plays their part, because it's not, as you say, just for government, it's for all of us. And what's more, of course, we're all beginning to notice this, because climate change is actually having a real effect. If you look at the large areas of Wales that were underwater only last week, if you think of what's happened in Spain 3 weeks ago, who would have thought of Spain as being flooded, having too much water? And if you think about the fact that in very simple ways we know this, the water used to come down in sweet, refreshing showers. It now all comes down at once. And we've got no way of dealing with that. We don't know how to deal with that. And it means that an individual football pitch or a tennis court or whatever it is now subject to pressures which we've never seen before. And that is when the temperature rises above pre-industrial levels of only 1.1 degree. And we are going towards, at the moment, 3 degrees. So the effect is absolutely devastating. And we are going to feel it, not in our children's time or our grandchildren's time. We're going to feel it today and tomorrow. And that's why it's so urgent for everybody, and not least football clubs and sports clubs generally, to accept, first of all, that they've got to adapt to what is going to be an ever increasing problem, but that also they've got to do their bit towards making that, to contain that problem so that it doesn't become overwhelmingly disastrous.
Thank you for that very uplifting introduction. I should say, by the way, there's going to be loads of opportunity for people on the call to ask questions. We've got a fantastic group of people on the call today from all across sport. And I think Russell, our chair, has joined with a group of master's students from Loughborough University as well. So they might have a few questions for you as well. But if you've got questions, there'll be time at the end. If there's things you want to raise in the chat, then just put them in the chat and I'll do my best to kind of introduce you throughout the call. But just on 3 degrees, I mean, when you were the chair of the committee, you were seeing all of the science coming across your desk. What does 3 degrees look like?
Well, the first thing is we don't know, because it's absolutely without precedent. It's already true that the temperatures are rising further and faster than ever in history. Now, we know that because you can go down into the ice, and it works rather like, you know, when you cut down a tree, you can see the lines around the tree. And when there are wide gaps, it means there's been quite a lot of rain. And when there are narrow gaps, it's because there hasn't been much rain. Well, if you go down to the ice, it does the same thing. And you can go back nearly 1 million years into the ice, and you can see how cold and how hot the weather was. And there are little globules which hold the air, so you get an extra piece of information. What we know is that at no time ever has the temperature risen so far and so fast, or the amount of carbon in the atmosphere been so great. So this is not like the ice ages and the normal rises and falls of temperature, which have always been. This is absolutely outside that. So we don't know what would happen. But what we fear will happen is, and it's already happening, is that very fundamental things happen. For example, the world now rotates slightly differently. Oh, it only makes a few milliseconds difference to our time, but it's already changed our time because the water has increased so much from the ice melting that it's moved the world round a bit. But then the thing that really worries us all, and is much more frightening, is the fact that the ocean currents, like indeed the warm ocean current that means that we in Britain have relatively mild weather, that those ocean currents will be affected and change. And that will mean that, of course, we might go into an eternal ice age if, in fact, the Gulf Stream no longer operated. And it's already clear that the warming of the seas is changing the way in which the seas themselves operate. So the trouble with 3 degrees is that we don't know, but we would expect it to be, I mean, disastrous in a manner which we really can't comprehend, which is why the international community has said 1.5 by 2050. So when people say, oh, well, I want to do something about climate change, why do we have to do it so quickly? The reason is that if we allow it to go above that, we move into situations which are genuinely unknown, but very clearly will be disastrous.
I've been really worried about Manchester City's form over the past 6 weeks, and the prospect of an eternal ice age, I think, has put my concerns about our form in some context. I mean, thank you for, I guess, for clarifying the seriousness of the challenge that we've got. And it's important to continually remind ourselves of what we're actually talking about and what we're actually dealing with, because there's a remarkable amount of good work going on across sport, as you know, in sustainability, but it is all about this overarching context. And I think, you know, continuing to remind ourselves of this context is really important. I think we're going to come on to some of that action in a minute, and the practical action that individuals and organisations can take, because that's the whole purpose of BASIS. But let's just talk for a minute about the law and about politics. I know the reason why this is so timely is because there'd be a number of people on the call who are aware that currently going through the House of Lords is the proposed legislation to introduce an independent regulator for football to ensure that football is financially sustainable. And at the moment, we're in the phase of that bill, which is the committee of the whole House in the House of Lords, which is where peers can propose amendments to that legislation to broaden its scope or to tighten definitions. And there was a group of amendments that were introduced to that bill, which were discussed on Monday, which was in varying different ways, which were designed to build environmental sustainability into the remit of the regulator. And you contributed to that debate. And I'm going to try, and bear with me because my technical skills aren't brilliant, I'm going to try and play a segment of your contribution to that debate. So you can tell us a bit about the debate, and you can tell us a bit about why you were motivated to speak. But let me just try and play it for us.
I simply raise this because I think that if a club wants to go green, fans want their club to be more environmentally friendly, fine. But the regulator should have absolutely zilch to say on it, and certainly no power to impose it.
Speaking in this debate until I heard that last speech, I would first of all remind the House of my interest, because the company which I chair helps quite a number of
Thanks, be quiet. Come here.
Meet the sustainability needs that we have. But I do have to say that football, like so many sports, but more than any other, sets an example which is of considerable importance. And sustainability is best defined, as the chairman of Coca-Cola once said to me, I believe that sustainability means that this company is going to be here in 125 years, like it's been here for 125 years. In other words, sustainability is a central issue of the continuance of businesses. And the idea that you could see a football club continuing which didn't do something about the use of water or concern itself with the damage done by using fertilizers unnecessarily, or didn't think about the wastage from non-recyclable cups and the like, would be actually balmy. And one of the problems that is now happening is that some people are politicizing the necessary needs that we have. And they are pretending that somehow or other it is those of us who are pressing green issues are the politicizers. Not at all. They are the ones who are denying the truth, denying the facts, not demanding what we need, in order that the young people who now watch football will live in a world in which they can live happily. Because if we don't fight climate change as we need to, we will give to the next generation a world which is intolerable. And I do have to say, those people who politicise this issue, as we have just heard, that what they're really doing is saying to their grandchildren, we don't care about the world that you will have. We want to be comfortable now. We don't want to ask anybody to do anything. We're not even going to remind people to do the things that are good for them and their business. And all we're suggesting in this bill is that it is a good idea to ask the regulator to remind people of the standards which are now accepted and insisted upon by all decent businesses, and that these are not exceptional, they are not political, they are merely what we today expect. And that small number of people who do not understand that are betraying not just the present generation, but their children and grandchildren. And I hope that this House will feel, just one moment, I will give way, I hope this House will feel that it is our duty to make sure that we can look our grandchildren in the eyes and say we did our best to make sure that your world is a world in which it's a pleasure to live. And I give way to the gentleman.
So the previous contribution in that debate was from Baroness Fox, who was opposing the amendments, and the amendments in the end were withdrawn because the government said we're going to take these issues under consideration. I want to come to that in a second, but just tell us a little bit about why you were motivated to speak in the debate in the first place, because I don't think you were planning to.
No, I wasn't. Indeed, I wasn't planning at all to. I wanted to listen to it because, I mean, I think there really is a perfectly reasonable argument to say that the regulator is there to do the things which are manifestly need to be done, and which the football industry, so to speak, has sport has perhaps failed in. That's what it's supposed to be doing. Now, there's every reason to argue that football as in general has begun to be really serious about sustainability, and that one should give the football clubs a real chance to achieve these things voluntarily before one thinks about imposing special arrangements, is what you do if you give it to the regulator. And I have great sympathy with that. I mean, my own view is that the government was right to say there is no need to give this power to the regulator, because we accept that the industry is really going to do what it says it's going to do. And there are two problems with that, though. The first is that almost every other regulator, if not every regulator, does have a responsibility for sustainability. So it will be very unusual that this regulator doesn't have it. The second thing is that adds to the pressure on the clubs, because if the clubs don't do what they say they're going to do, what they know they need to do, then there'll be absolutely no doubt that the regulator will have this added to his or her responsibilities. So this is a very good opportunity for us to recognise that there's a real chance for the industry itself, for the football clubs and the sport in every way, to do the right thing. And we'd be much better doing the right thing ourselves than having intervention from a government regulator. I mean, I always think government does things badly. So if we could do it voluntarily and do it within our knowledge and understanding of our clubs and how it all works, if we do it that way, we'll do it better. But we do have to do it. And what that debate means is the only way the government can be justified in this very unusual thing of not giving the regulator this responsibility is if we step up to the mark. So it puts us in a much tougher position, in my view, than giving the regulator this responsibility. And that's why I would, had there been a vote on it, voted not to have the regulator being given this power, on the grounds that we would give the time that's necessary for the Football Association, for the Football League, for every football organisation and club to do the right thing.
Well, I'm sitting here with somebody who's responsible for driving this work across 72 different football clubs, so no pressure, Ben. So when it comes to that voluntary action, to that practical action, I mean, irrespective of whether it's football or golf or tennis or rugby or rowing or, you know, any number of sports that are represented on this call today and in our membership. Now, I know there isn't one, like a one size fits all approach to this. It varies organisation by organisation. But if you were asked by a representative audience of BASIS members, what are the key things, the key practical steps that you should take to drive sustainability throughout your organisation or throughout your sport? What should we focus on? What would your advice be?
Well, I think the very first thing is to say, what are the particular vulnerabilities that we have as a club? You know, if you had a ground very close to a river, or where you knew there was flooding, there would be no doubt about what your first priority would be. It would be, what did you do about that? If you knew that you had really serious problems of the pitch flooding because of the way in which the ground lies and the increasingly heavy storms, then you would do those first. So very clearly, you first of all need to have, to use the snooty words, you have a materiality concept. What's really going to hit you first? What do you really got to get right? And that's important not only because you need to get your priorities right, but also because those are the things that your fans and that those club directors and others will immediately understand have to be done. And the second thing is you look at where your carbon footprint really is. Where are you using energy or water which you don't need to use? And the reason for that is not only because of carbon, which is what you're measuring by, but it's because of the money. If you use less water, if you lose less energy, then you really do make a huge difference. And in the work, for example, that we have been doing for sustainability for Everton, what we sought to do all the time is to find ways in which by doing these things, you save money. And of course, the third thing that comes is a much more delicate thing, but it's a thing which I think we very much need, which is that you start looking at everything through sustainability eyes. And I go back to that definition of sustainability. It is, how do we run things so that we're going to be here in 10, 20 years' time? How do we do it so that we protect ourselves? Now, if you want to protect yourselves, what do? You reduce your costs as much as you can. You make sure that what you do doesn't harm the future, and you do and you get thinking about it in that way. So you look at the strip and you say, can this be recycled when people don't use it any longer? When you look at the cups that are being used in the ground, are these all recyclable? And do we make it easy for people to hand them in and recycle them? Do we have a system of that kind? And then we look at our waste. Is there a way of making our waste, not only collecting it, but actually making money out of it? If we collect it properly, we probably can. Are there things that we can do there? So what one needs is to have the kind of audit of what we do that you would have as far as normal finance, and see where you can make the biggest impact first. And then you want to get good advice to do it in the best possible way, because one of the dangers is that people do it wrong, and then they end up by having a worse position and they can't move on to the next stage. So one of the things that, for example, with Everton, we've been very keen on doing is a proper strategic program, so that they know right forward where they have to go, even doing things which they're not going to do for a bit, things which reach out into the community so that they serve the community more effectively, things that deal with their fans and the way their fans are treated, all those things which they will not necessarily be doing now, but which, if you do the right things at this moment, then as you build on that, so these other things become easier, and in very many cases actually save you money or earn you money.
So we'll come to Everton in a second. And just at this point, I'd just like to encourage people to, I've got some messages coming in on the chat, kind of private to me, but I'd encourage people to share any reflections or start to pose questions that they've got in the chat and start to raise hands so I can come to you when this element of the conversation is finished. And as part of that, I think we've got so many great people on the call today, and we've talked a bit about practical action. It'd be great to hear what organisations who are represented on the call today are doing, have been doing, and are looking to do in the future, because I think that will definitely help to enrich the conversation. We'll come to Everton in a second, but you were talking about the commercial case there, and you've worked with, you know, some like really serious businesses, like, you know, major multinationals. Ultimately, when you are having these conversations with them about how they're going to understand, master, and harness sustainability action and integrate it properly into their business, is it because of the commercial element of like is the commercial aspects of it the thing that persuades them, or is it their desire to do the right thing, or their desire to be able to present themselves in a certain way publicly? Is it a little bit of everything?
Well, if it's not commercial, then they won't go on doing it. So I'm very clear about it. The first bit of it must be how does becoming sustainable actually improve your bottom line? And that's why I went into doing this in the first place 26 years ago, because I got fed up with business people saying, oh, it's all too expensive. This is an add-on extra. We don't have the money for it. And I wanted to say to them, I'd been Secretary of State for the Environment, and all the time I kept on seeing them throwing money away. Whereas if they were sustainable and they had, they thought about their energy and thought about their water and thought about these things, they really could make a difference to their bottom line. So it's a bit of everything, because of course it's also reputational. We did all the background work on the way in which people were employed to make clothes for Primark, for example. And we did that in Bangladesh and all over the world. And of course, the reason they wanted to do that was reputational. They wanted to make sure that what was sold in their shops was honestly sold, was properly paid for, and everybody was happy about that, and their reputation depended on it. But truthfully, by doing it in the right sort of way, one has to say they get commercial benefits from it, because the factories that produce their clothes are ready to produce their clothes in the best possible way and the best possible time, because they treat them properly. And so what is reputational is often also very clearly commercially necessary. You bring it all together, but if you produce something that isn't going to work financially, ultimately, it may mean a bit of investment to start with, but if it's not going to work financially, ultimately, then people aren't going to do it and they aren't going to stick to it.
So it's the virtuous circle, I guess.
Yeah.
Just let's get into Everton a little bit, and then throw open the floor to everybody. Incidentally, I mean, my understanding of the Everton work that you've been doing is that the starting point for it was the decision to build a new stadium, which my mother, who is a season ticket holder at Goodison Park, has still got mixed feelings about. Incidentally,
I can't help that.
Incidentally, we've got the stadium architects on the call today. Actually, a long-term partner of Basis, BDP Pattern, and I think you'll have worked alongside them as part of this process. But when did your work with Everton change from we want to build a new stadium and we want to get it right to we want the whole club to kind of represent this agenda properly?
Well, once Everton said to itself, we are going to talk about the stadium as the most sustainable stadium in the world, which it will be, then people are going to ask about the club, aren't they? I mean, you can't divorce this. So one begins to realize that there is a holistic issue. And then they also said to themselves, right, when you start using the stadium, how are we going to use it in a sustainable way? Because one of the problems about buildings, as your architect friends will agree with me, and one of the problems about buildings is you can build very sustainable buildings which are run very unsustainably. And there are a lot of them in City of London. I know a really large number where I really want to smack people's wrists because they've got a perfectly sustainable building and then they don't run it properly. So that was it. But then, of course, once you start talking about it in that way, all sorts of people, fans and people involved in one way or another, they say, we want to contribute. So it's not just that you want to do it, but people say, I want to be able to say this. I mean, there is a special reason why Everton is like this, and it's true of quite a number of clubs, and that is that they really do connect with their community where they are. Liverpool 4 really matters. And one of the things that's so remarkable about them is simply that this is part of their whole approach. And that's why, frankly, I love them, because I really do feel that this is an enterprise which really lifts the community in which they work. And that's why it was so important to have the new stadium in the same area and not to move out to some leafy suburb where they wouldn't be in the same way the upholder of the way to live among people who have found life pretty hard.
Yeah. I mean, John Scott Coley is the architect director for BDP Pattern. I'm not sure, John Scott, if you, I don't want to put you in the spotlight without giving you any advance warning, but if you've got any kind of observations you want to make off the back of that, and if I may just ask a question to either you, John Scott, or to both of you, because the new stadium is right on the Mersey, and was that part of the consideration of the design of it, and like how is it going to be kind of a secure location to build a stadium that's designed to be there for the long term?
Well, if I may say more than that, it actually contributes to the sustainability of the dock, which would otherwise not be as sustainable because a number of changes had to be made in order to secure it. But the great thing about it is that it is built into the dock in such a way as if in some long-term future people wanted to remove it, you've not destroyed the dock itself. So the history is still there. And that was part of the sustainability. It was, you must not in this generation destroy the opportunities of future generations to enjoy some of the things that we have. So the argument about this dock was that you did it almost like an ark. You put it into the dock, but you made sure that you didn't destroy what was there before, so that if in 500 years' time somebody wanted to do something different, we hadn't destroyed it for them.
Brilliant. I mean, weirdly, my granddad, my mum's dad, was a docker on the Albert Dock, so it's I guess that whole intergenerational responsibility thing chimes extremely well. John Scott, I see that you have unmuted yourself, so I'm going to pin you and put you on the spot.
Yeah, well, thank you. And Lord Deben, it was very nice to see you again. I remember sitting in your sitting room there many years ago talking about rainwater harvesting for the new stadium, and just speaking about the idea about commercial aspects and operating the buildings correctly. I remember referencing that conversation when we then started to work with contractors who wanted to say, why do we need this rainwater harvesting? I mean, surely this isn't, this is a classic value engineering item. And we said, no, it's been agreed at Whitehall. We are going to have this, and it is there today. So that's very tangible, built evidence of your influence there. I think what you were speaking about with the site was wonderfully summarized, really. I think it's an interesting aspect to me in looking at kind of the green building certification systems of the world, that there's a trend towards, of course, energy and water efficiency, but also thinking about social sustainability and maintaining the social fabric of communities. And I think that's that's partly why this is such an amazing site for Everton's new stadium, because it is in that North Liverpool community. There is a long history of Evertonians working in the docks and the interplay there. And I think we have been able to stitch something in really quite successfully. So.
Well, I think we're all looking forward to seeing the stadium opening, and let's hope, for my mother's sake, that Everton is still a Premier League club when it does it. John Scott, thank you for jumping in. I'm going to start just to turn to some of the questions that are coming through in the chat at the moment. There's a couple of questions that have come to me that I'm going to try and weave together, and I might do it in a clumsy way, so I apologise in advance if I do. But one from Kathy Gibbs at the ECB, which is about misinformation and disinformation, which is becoming a significant challenge, I think, overall for the whole democratic process, but I think particularly for the climate debate. And actually, the thing we didn't cover was that in the House of Lords debate that we showed a clip of earlier, the person who intervened on your speech effectively got up and just denied the science of climate change. And that's happening in a legislative chamber of one of the oldest and most famous parliaments in the world. How do we kind of win this battle of, a fact is a fact rather than an alternative fact? And I think linked to that is another question that's come through to me from John Hurst, who works for Best Energy. And I think ultimately the question is about the decisions that governments make and the speed with which they make them. So the example that he gave was around Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and the fact that the government didn't act far enough in advance to prevent what they knew would come down the line at some point. And I think this is relevant in the context of the floods in Valencia. It's even been part of the debate about the floods in Wales. The information that government is putting out there to people who are affected by these climate-related events, and taking the decisions that need to be taken to protect those communities far enough in advance. And the context for those decisions is always the information that is available to people as part of a democratic process. So I guess taking the misinformation, disinformation kind of angle of it first, and how you, as an experienced politician, would advise your colleagues in government to tackle that issue. And then I guess the extension from that is, how do you encourage them to make the necessary but sometimes courageous decisions in that context where all information is contested?
Well, first of all, we do have a real problem with social media and AI and all sorts of other things at the moment, where people talk about my truth as if anything is, that there's no objective truth. And of course, we have to fight that at every level. It's not just climate change, but it's absolutely everything is threatened by that, from vaccinations right across to is Mr. Putin responsible for the war, so to speak? I mean, there's misinformation, and there are all sorts of international operations which are designed to create misinformation. So let's not underestimate the seriousness of that. But there are three things that governments can do. The first thing is they ought to have a proper information system so that they can get this stuff out. I constantly fought the previous government because it wouldn't do it. How do you possibly get people to use, for example, heat pumps if they've no idea what a heat pump is, if it's impossible to discover whether you can get somebody who is capable of putting it in, if you have no measure about what savings it might make? Of course you don't do it. So that you've got to inform people, and there should be and the Irish have done it extremely well, and we could easily copy the Republic of Ireland and do that to start with anyway. The second thing you have to do is actually constantly to remind people of why. So when you're talking about the floods in Wales, you remind people that this has come about because of climate change, You could have had floods, but you'd not have them anything like as bad, nor would you be in the position of having to admit there were going to be more floods like this, and more regularly, more frequently. That's going to happen. So that leads you then to explain to people why you're going to spend their money, and you're going to get private people to spend their money in order to protect them in the future. The problem for the politician is that if they don't do anything, they save money. And it's only when the disaster happens that the politicians get blamed. Well, very often the ones that got benefits of saving the money have long ceased to be ministers. So it's a new lot that get blamed for what hasn't happened in the past. And of course, much of what is damaged now are things that we should have done 20 years ago. And it's always an excuse. But the last thing that has to be done is that we have to explain all this stuff in simple terms. And I've just a very quick little story. They've got to be simple terms which everybody understands. Now, we all know that we're losing bumblebees. There are no bumblebees are getting less and less. And we've written that off to the basis that farming practices means that we have lost the areas where the bumblebees used to be. And the second reason is because of the use of neonicotinoids and other chemicals which kill the bumblebees. But there's been some recent, about 3 months ago, I read it in Nature and I'm fascinated. There's been some recent work done to show that the other thing is that because of the rise in temperature, it has affected the bumblebee's sense of smell. So bumblebees can no longer smell as easily the flowers, and therefore they can't find their food, they can't find their nectar, they can't find the pollen. Now, we all know how important bumblebees are for actually moving between flowers and pollinating them. We know that. Now, everybody's heard of a bumblebee. Most people will be shocked to find that they've lost their sense of smell. What a terrible thing to happen. And that's happening in Britain because of climate change. And then you can move from that, which everyone understands, to the bigger things of saying, and that's the same thing that is causing the floods in Spain or the floods in Wales. And if you're living in East Anglia and you're not being flooded at that particular time, of course, it's very easy to forget that. But if you bring it home to people in their simple matters, like my bumblebee, then you really do get people to be emotionally involved and they begin to understand what we're talking about.
Yeah. It's really interesting that actually. It reminds me of, I think it was in August or September, we did a webinar about communicating sustainability, and it used all of the latest kind of insights into what public audiences respond to. And all of the research that's been done suggests that people don't respond to statistics, and they don't want to hear phrases like net zero. They want stories that they can connect with emotionally on a human level. And that's the way that you bring this stuff alive for people. And I think that's as relevant to sport as it is to politics and government. But just quickly, you mentioned about ministers now getting blamed for things that didn't happen before. What did you get blamed for that was somebody else's fault when you were the Environment Secretary?
Oh, well, of course, I got blamed for the fact that our flood defences were nothing like what they ought to be, because they hadn't been dealt with in that way. No one had taken properly into account the rise in sea levels, and I was responsible for trying to improve our flood defences. I did that as Minister in the Agriculture Department because, for curious historical reasons, they were responsible for sea defences. And in fact, I managed to get Mrs. Thatcher to agree that we would improve the level of sea defences to take climate change into account, because you'll remember she was one of the first people to believe in climate change, to see that you had to do something about it. So our sea defences are a bit better than they would otherwise be, but it's still true, frankly, that you get blamed for whatever has happened before. But the thing you have to do is, as a minister, is to say to yourself, I am going to do the best I can to make sure that the things that need to be done, even though they're not popular, are done. And there's no point in being a minister otherwise. Far too many ministers of all political parties, and not party political at all, far too many ministers of all political parties don't start off by saying, I've got this job, I'm going to make a difference. I want to make sure that what I do, other people wouldn't have done. And one of the first things I'm going to do is to look at the real threats, which I need to do now, even though that will be deal with now, even though that will be unpopular and probably expensive, and I may have to fight the Treasury tooth and nail, as I did on the on the sea defences, in order to get the money I needed.
I'd be fascinated to hear in some detail about what those conversations. Would it have been Nigel Lawson who was the Chancellor at the time?
No, we didn't really get to that stage. We managed to organise things in a different way because Mrs. Thatcher said, I believe in climate change, we've got to do something about it. So that was always very helpful, I have to say.
Yeah, not a bad starting point. So we've got a few minutes left, so keep your questions and comments coming. Just the point you were making then about ministers having the right kind of mindset coming into the role. I think my observation is that you've worked a fair bit with the current Secretary of State, with Ed Miliband in various different capacities. Where do you think his head's at? Do you think he's starting with the right approach?
Oh yes, I'm very much a believer that he is doing the right thing. I think he's the one of the few ministers who's come into government with a real programme, knows what he needs to do, set it up well, got Chris Stark running the delivery package. I think in general terms, they're doing it very effectively. Their problem is, I think, that the rest of the government has got to keep up with them. Quite a number of things have been done which don't help and which could have been done. But he, I think, is a sterling example of what needs to be done, and you know that because he is being demonized by the anarchic newspapers like the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph.
Okay, well, we will keep a close watching brief on all of that. And just for context, Chris Stark, you were saying, has been brought in to kind of run the Mission to Zero. Is it Mission Control that they've called it?
Yes, I think that's right. Yes.
So he was the chief exec of the Climate Change Committee when you were its chair. So you've worked closely with Chris.
So I know that he's really an excellent choice. So I'm very keen on what's happening. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Russell Seymour, our chair and founder, has put his hand up. I think Russ is with a group of his students at Loughborough. So Russ, I'm going to pin you and invite you to ask your question.
Lovely. Thanks, Don. Lord Deben, thank you for your time and speaking to Basis today. Really appreciate it. And I think the last time we met, I was probably still the sustainability manager at Lord's Cricket Ground and trying to make it work there. And as Dom just said, I'm now a senior fellow at Loughborough University and in charge of a master's degree in sustainable sport business. We've got a cohort of the students here today listening in. You've been very clear in what you think of the issues and where the direction that the world is going. I want to ask you, are you optimistic? And what would be for the world in general, maybe sports specifically as well? But also, what would be your message to maybe the young people that are in the room with me today that are seeking a career around sustainability in sport?
Well, I am optimistic because I see so much that is being done. I mean, I get a bit pessimistic when I see how much there has to be done. But if I look back as to where I was when I first became chairman of the Climate Change Committee, which is after all 12 years ago, if I'd looked forward then, I would never have thought that we would have the big changes like the whole world signing up to net zero in Paris, the remarkable meeting in Glasgow where we really ratcheted things up. Of course, lots of people aren't doing what they promised to do, and of course we're going to have to go on ratcheting them up. But in general, we have got to a stage which I am very much more optimistic about, although I do recognise that what we've got to do is enormous. And I also recognise this whole problem of misinformation. I mean, I am appalled at perfectly reasonable people saying things which are manifestly not sensible. I mean, Kemi Badenoch said, I am not a climate change skeptic, but I am a net zero in 2050 skeptic. You can't be that. You can't be both of those. You either are both. You have to recognize that the reason for 2050 is simply because you go past that net zero and you actually throw yourselves into a world where we have no idea what would happen, except that it'll be very, very nasty and very, very difficult to handle. And so with your young people, I'm so pleased they're doing it and doing the course, because sport will make such a difference. I mean, you are all there. You are all there to make a difference. And I think if I had to say a very simple thing, there's a wonderful comment by, you'll be surprised at this, by Cardinal Newman. He said, we're all in this world with a real vocation, something that we've got to do, and only we have got to do it. And the lucky ones amongst us know what it is. Well, you're the lucky ones. You know what it is. It is to use sport to make a difference. And if you don't make a difference in life, what's the point of being here? We're here to make a difference, and every one of us makes a difference in our own ways, small or big. And if we don't bother about that, we become absolutely useless to the rest of the world, and none of you want to be that. So best of luck, I say.
Thank you.
I think we'd all echo that. Thank you, Russ, and thanks to all the students there. And I think we all absolutely would agree with it. Just on the subject of making a difference, I would like to pay due deference to our hosts here at the EFL today and just invite Ben Fisher, who drives all of the EFL sustainability work, just to summarise a little bit of the work that they're doing here and how Ben intends that it will make a difference across the 72 Football League clubs. Ben?
Hi, everyone. Thanks. And yeah, just to say it's been a really, really interesting hour. And I think a lot of what's been spoken about today chimes with what I want our approach to be and what our approach is at EFL. And I think our priority for this season, firstly, is around that point of the industry and football taking lead and I suppose stepping up in the absence of kind of other regulation. So a lot of what we're doing at the moment is around framework setting, and we've got a number of clubs who are taking part in a scheme we run, which is looking at recognising and supporting really strong sustainability work in EFL clubs. And we're hoping that over the season there'll be more and more news. I know there's looking at the attendee list earlier, there are colleagues on the call who will be part of that, where we can share, well, this is what clubs are doing. This is, it's not just in our context, Forest Green Rovers have been the trailblazer, but it's not just kind of, an outlying set of clubs. It's something that is embedded in what we do as football, and it's the same with our colleagues in the Premier League. So a lot of our focus this season is about trying to set that common framework and crucially share those stories to show that we are responsible, we are setting standards, and we as a club, 72 clubs are working towards the same goals. So I think that that challenge that Lord Deben suggested around, well, what are we doing? We're really trying to step up there. And the other side of my work, I'm very fortunate that as well as working with our clubs, I work with our club's charitable arms. And I think that question around disinformation is something that is actually quite pertinent to a lot of what we do in terms of making this topic, which can seem quite abstract, very relevant to the social fabric and the social outcomes of our charities. And again, linking to the conversation about Everton, we've got a number of our charities now that are going out and not talking about what to do on a match day to be more sustainable when you come to visit us, but it's actually going, well, what challenges are you facing? Is that mold and damp in your homes because of fuel poverty? Is that around healthy food? Is it about actually active travel and accessibility? And we're looking at how do we weave this climate conversation into those social outcomes. And I think from my perspective, and certainly from the experience we've had with our club community organisations, it's that engagement, it's that breaking it down to say, well, the climate crisis ultimately is about those things you care about day in, day out. For me, that's potentially something really powerful. And I know that there are colleagues on this call that are doing the same kind of work. So we've got a really exciting opportunity, I think, in the coming years to play that role of one stage kind of pushing what is football, what is our industry doing to step up and take responsibility for our impacts, but how can we be that conduit to make this topic more relevant and feel more tangible to people's day-to-day, which I think, from my perspective, that's a key way of cutting through some of that disinformation or some of that, oh, it's for those people over there. And that's, you know, we're certainly not going to solve that overnight, but I think collectively the people on this call, you know, we want to play our part in making this kind of day to day. In the same breath we talk about equality, the same breath we talk about social impact sport, we should be talking about how we engaging communities in the environment. So really great to hear everything today, and hopefully you'll see more from us on how we're stepping up and how we're contributing to this.
Thanks, Ben.
Well,
John, your reaction to that?
Can I just say, I mean, I think that's a very remarkable statement, because it's exactly what we need to do. And the thing that I think is so important is that this is not theoretical. I mean, the thing I love doing is helping people to achieve this end. I mean, Sancroft's been doing this now for 26 years, but every day, somebody said to me the other day, why on earth are you still doing it at your age? You don't need to do it. Why are you doing it? The answer is because doing it rather than talking about it is what is so exciting, is helping people find a way of meeting these responsibilities in a way which is profitable for them, which they can afford, and which really makes life better for them, is really very exciting. And that's what Sancroft does. But I just think that there is a comment. There's at the beginning of or early on in the Pope's encyclical Laudato Si, which I quote all the time, and lots of people who are absolutely not religious at all still understand this. What he said was, climate change is only the symptom of what we've done to the world. And what we've done to the world is to pollute the seas and the atmosphere. We've treated other people in a way which is unacceptable. We've lost fertility in the soil. We've used all sorts of resources which are damaging. We've done all those things. What we've got to do, lost biodiversity, and it's the earth crying out for healing. And so all the things you were last talking about are things that we need to do. And they're the things that make people understand that fighting climate change isn't something right out there. What it is dealing with the things they know are wrong. They know that the fact that we now can produce so much less because we've ruined the fertility of our fields, they know it's wrong that people should be flooded, that it should be so hot in the summer. And some of your sports are really going to have to face the heat in the summer, because we've now had 2 successive years, each of them, every month has been the hottest month of that kind ever. I mean, that is really serious. And we're going to have to deal with that. But what we're dealing with are the real down-to-earth effects of people. That's why I just love the actual business of helping people to deliver that. Because every time you can look and say, well, that wouldn't have happened. I've made a difference. And that's the only piece of pride you're allowed, the pride of making a difference.
Well, I think that is a wonderful note to end on. And just to... the context, Lord Deben, you and I have known each other for quite a long time. And it was from when I was working for CAFOD, and it was around the time that the papal encyclical Laudato Si that you were talking about was published. And we have never had a conversation in all of those years where you haven't referenced it. And at 11:58 in a 1-hour call, I was expecting that we were actually going to get through one for the first time. But there we go. And actually, you know, like you say, whether people have got a religious background or not, it is worth a read, because it actually does, I think, encapsulate the challenges, but also the importance of taking action, as well as anything really that I've ever read. The last thing, there are a couple of questions that have come in the chat, but I've never finished a BASIS webinar on time, and I still haven't, because we've gone over the hour. I promise you that people who've asked questions that we haven't got to, you will get a response. And for everybody who has a desire to speak to Lord Deben or follow up on anything from this call, we will make sure that you're able to contact Lord Deben and his team. So just come to us and we'll put you in touch. But John, if I may call you John, I just want to thank you for being so generous with your time, for being back with BASIS. It's a little while since we've done this together, but thank you so much for joining us. We will do it again for sure. And whether it's in the world of business or in the halls of Parliament, keep fighting the good fight, because you know, we're all right behind you, and I think with your advice and your support, we'll all do great things on this side of the fence as well.
Super. Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it enormously, and as always, it was brilliantly chaired. There we are.